Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. Before we settle in, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy my videos. And if you'd like, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always find it strangely comforting to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Grab your favorite drink, and let's ease into tonight's story together. My granddad worked for the Vatican. I just found his diary. A small church, familiar hymns. The soft, steady comfort of routine. People in dark coats, speaking in the careful voices they reserve for grief, and cups of tea waiting in the hall afterwards, as if tea could stop anything from changing. He'd lived a long life, 92 years. When someone reaches that age, death arrives with less shock and more inevitability. Still sad, obviously. But there's an acceptance that settles into the room like a shared agreement. The priest spoke about service, about generosity, about travel. That part always made people smile, because everyone knew the story. Grandad had been a missionary, the kind who went far and asked for little. He traveled to places most of us would never visit, bringing faith to communities that welcomed him like family. At least, that's what we'd always believed. It wasn't even a question in our family. It was simply a fact, repeated across birthdays and Christmas dinners and Sunday afternoons. Your granddad's in Kenya this month. He's written from Peru. He's doing God's work, that man. When he was home, he never talked much about it, not in detail. But that only reinforced the story. Everyone said missionaries were like that, humble, private, not the type to parade their good deeds. So we didn't push. We didn't need to. We already knew who he was. After the service, we went back to my grandparents' house for the wake. That house had always been part of him. It was the kind of place where the kettle seemed permanently warm and the furniture never moved. Even the smell was familiar: polish, old books, and whatever my nan had baked last. Neighbors arrived with plates covered in foil. Distant relatives turned up who I hadn't seen in years, wearing the same expressions I remembered from other funerals. Everyone spoke in the same gentle rhythm. Sorry for your loss. He was a lovely man. He lived a good life. My mum did most of the hosting without really thinking about it, moving from room to room with practiced politeness. My dad looked tired but grateful. He listened to stories about his father that seemed to soften something in him, even when his eyes shone. People told the same tales they always told. How Grandad once gave his coat to a man waiting at a bus stop in winter. How he'd quietly paid for someone's shopping when they were short. How he never missed Sunday service if he was in the country. And of course, the travel stories. The vague, affectionate ones. He used to send postcards from everywhere, my aunt said, laughing softly. Always with that neat handwriting. He brought back those little wooden carvings, someone else added. Remember them, from somewhere. He was a man of faith, the priest said again, as he accepted another cup of tea. A steady faith. Everyone nodded. I nodded too. I was 25, old enough to have my own flat, my own job, and my own routines. Young enough that a funeral still felt slightly unreal, like a scene you watch rather than something you inhabit. I spent most of the wake in the background, making myself useful in small ways. Collecting cups, refilling the biscuit plate, carrying folded chairs. If someone spoke to me, I smiled and answered politely. A couple of people said things like, "You must have been so proud of him, and it's amazing what he did," and I agreed, because it was true. I was proud. Who wouldn't be? My granddad had traveled the world for his faith. That's what I knew about him. That was his story. It was comforting to have a story that made sense. A few days later, once the funeral was done and the house had gone quiet again, reality came back in its plainest form. The house needed sorting. My nan had passed years earlier, and Grandad had lived alone since. Over time, things accumulate when there's no one around to argue about clutter. Cupboards fill with items that were still good. Drawers become museums of old batteries and instruction manuals. Boxes gather behind sofas. The spare room becomes storage. And because the house would be sold, it all had to be dealt with. My parents asked if I could help. So on a Saturday morning, I drove over and spent the day boxing things up. It was ordinary work. The kind that makes time move faster because it's repetitive. Clothing into bags. Old kitchenware into boxers. Paperwork into piles. My mum found a stack of letters and paused to read them, smiling at some, frowning at others. My dad moved through rooms with determination, as if a brisk pace would keep him from getting stuck. I did what I was told. Pack, carry, stack, repeat. On the second day, my dad mentioned the loft. "Can you go up there and have a look?" he asked. "Just see what's up there. If it's just junk, we'll leave it for last." The loft hatch was in the hallway outside the spare bedroom. I'd known it was there, but I couldn't remember ever going up. As a kid, I'd assumed it was full of insulation and spiders and things adults didn't want children finding. I pulled the ladder down and climbed up. The loft was exactly what lofts are. Dusty, warm, and full of forgotten things. Cardboard boxes, old suitcases, a roll of carpet, Christmas decorations in plastic tubs, a broken fan, picture frames wrapped in newspaper. Nothing surprising. I started checking labels, moving things slightly, shining my torch into corners, and then I saw a wooden box. It was larger than the others, made of dark wood, with a flat lid and simple clasp. It sat near the back, tucked behind a couple of suitcases and an old blanket. It didn't look mysterious. It looked like something someone had stored carefully. I dragged it out into the open and wiped dust off the lid with my sleeve. It was heavier than I expected, but not ridiculously so. I opened the clasp and lifted the lid. Inside were books, a lot of them, hardback journals, stacked neatly, some wrapped in cloth, some tied with string. The kind of notebooks you buy intending to fill with something important. Some were thick, some thinner, all worn at the corners. I picked up the top one and opened it. The first thing I recognized was the handwriting. Grandad's, the same neat, slightly slanted script he used on birthday cards and envelopes. I'd seen it enough times to know it instantly. I flipped a few pages, dates, places, long blocks of writing. It looked like diaries, lots of diaries. I called down the hatch. "Mom, Dad, there's a box up here full of Granddad's journals." My dad came first, climbing up and crouching beside me. He lifted one of the diaries, turning it over as if checking for a title. "What's this then?" he muttered, half to himself. My mom climbed up behind him, and the three of us sat in the loft light, looking into the box. "Did you know he kept these?" my mom asked. My dad shook his head slowly. "No, never mentioned it." My mom lifted a diary gently, like it might crumble. "He used to write letters all the time," she said. "Maybe he just liked writing." That seemed like a reasonable explanation. We didn't assume anything dramatic. People keep diaries. People write about their travels. It made sense that a missionary might keep journals from his trips. If anything, it felt sweet. Like we'd found a more personal part of him. My dad looked around the loft, as if deciding what to do. "We should take them down," he said. "Don't want them getting ruined up here." So we did. He passed them to me, one by one, and I stacked them carefully near the hatch. My mum found a couple of smaller wrapped bundles in the boxcloth packets tied with string and assumed they were souvenirs. "Probably little gifts," she said, smiling faintly. He was always bringing back bits and pieces. My dad nodded distractedly, his mind already half on the next task. "Joe," he said to me, "do you want them? You always liked reading." "Might be interesting," I shrugged. "Yeah, sure." It felt like inheriting a stack of family photos, a simple thing. That evening, I loaded the wooden box into my car and drove home. It didn't feel like I was transporting secrets. It felt like I was taking home the private memories of a man everyone loved. When I got back to my flat, I carried the box inside and set it down by my sofa. I didn't open it straight away. I made dinner. I washed up. I scrolled on my phone for a while like I always did. Then, later, with the house quiet and the day finally settling, I opened the box again and picked up the top diary. The cover was plain, no title, just worn leather and a faded corner. I opened to the first page. The date was written neatly at the top. Below it, one line sat alone on the page, as clean and calm as everything else. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and it is no longer necessary for me to remain silent." I stared at it for a moment, waiting for my brain to catch up. It wasn't what I expected. Not today we visited a village, where the weather was hot, or God was with us. Just that sentence. Like a door opening into a room I hadn't known existed in my own family home. I read it again. and then, slowly, I turned the page. I opened the diary again and began reading from the first full entry. Once I passed the opening line, there were no explanations, no acknowledgments of family, no indication that these words were meant for anyone else. The handwriting was consistent, the structure deliberate. This was not a journal written to remember. It was a record written to preserve accuracy. Rome, 14th of March, 1961. Assignment accepted. I was informed this morning that I would be traveling north, to a monastery near the Austrian border. The instruction was delivered through the usual channel and carried the expected authority. No justification was provided. I did not ask for one. The monastery has been inactive for several decades. The remaining brothers are advanced in age. Restoration work had recently begun on peripheral structures, following reports of deterioration and neglect. During the clearing of a storage space adjacent to the eastern cloister, a sealed stone panel was discovered. The panel bore no markings. No reference to the space exists in any architectural plan currently held by the diocesan archive. Behind the panel, a text was found. I was instructed that the text was not to be translated locally. It was not to be copied. It was not to be photographed. It was not to be read aloud. It was to be retrieved intact and transferred to Rome for classification and storage. I accepted the assignment. I departed Rome that evening by train. The journey was prolonged due to adverse weather conditions through the mountain passes. Snow accumulation delayed progress and required an overnight stop. I arrived at the monastery 2 days later than originally projected. The brothers received me politely. There was no ceremony or formal welcome. They did not offer hospitality beyond what was customary. Their demeanor suggested relief rather than reverence. They had not read the text. They explained that the manuscript had been examined briefly by one of the younger brothers during the initial discovery. He had not attempted translation. He had not spoken of its contents. He returned it to its wrapping and requested that the space be sealed again. Since that time, his behavior had altered. He did not report distress. He did not complain of illness. His speech remained coherent and measured. However, his prayer practice changed significantly. He abandoned the established structure of recitation and spoke instead of balance, interval, and repetition. He slept irregularly. He reported no dreams. He showed no fear of the text. The brothers agreed unanimously that it should remain untouched. The storage room was opened in preparation for my arrival. The stone panel had been moved aside and rested against the wall. The air within the space was dry and cold, consistent with prolonged isolation. The room itself contained no furnishings beyond shelving. No religious symbols were present. The floor showed no markings beyond age and dust. The manuscript had been placed on a table at the center of the room and remained wrapped in linen. No one else remained in the room. I examined the binding first. The material was older than the monastery. The stitching technique did not conform to known ecclesiastical methods. The script on the cover resembled Latin, but did not align with recognized theological variants. I did not attempt translation. I prayed before handling the text. There was no resistance. The weight was consistent with its dimensions. There was no observable reaction to touch. I wrapped the manuscript carefully and placed it into the case provided. When I exited the room, the brothers did not ask where the text would be stored. They did not ask whether it would be returned. They did not ask for further instruction. They asked instead whether it would be kept apart. I confirmed that it would. They expressed gratitude, not for the retrieval itself, but for the speed of my arrival. The return journey was uninterrupted. No incidents were reported during transit. Upon arrival in Rome, the manuscript was transferred without delay. It was logged under provisional classification and moved to restricted storage pending further instruction. I was not asked to remain present during this process. I returned to my residence the same evening. Addendum, 18th of March, 1961. I was informed that the manuscript has been assigned a containment designation. Further examination will be conducted by a separate department. I have not been asked to participate. This is acceptable. Notes. It is not unusual for texts to be removed from circulation. The Church has always exercised discretion regarding preservation and access. However, it is noteworthy that no attempt was made to determine the text's theological alignment prior to its removal. The brothers did not speak of heresy. They spoke only of influence. I did not read beyond that point immediately. I closed the diary and let it rest in my hands, the weight of it now feeling more significant than before. Not because of what it described, but because of what it didn't. There were no accusations in the writing, no warnings, no moral judgments, only actions taken calmly and without debate. I placed the diary back into the box and noticed how many others remained unread, each one labeled by date, each one documenting another assignment, another journey, another retrieval. This had not been a singular event. It had been routine. I closed the lid and sat back, aware that the story I had grown up believing was no longer complete. Tomorrow, I would open the next diary. I selected the next diary by date alone. It was thicker than the first, the leather darker from use. The opening pages showed signs of repetition. Ink pressed deeper in places, as though the pen had paused there often. I turned past the initial line and allowed the handwriting to take over completely. Sicily, the 9th of September 1966 assignment confirmed. I was informed of the assignment 3 days prior to departure. The location was a coastal village in southern Sicily, accessible by road but isolated by geography and infrastructure. Communication from the local diocese had been inconsistent, though not urgent. The report referenced no artifact discovery. Instead, it referenced an anomaly. I was instructed to observe, verify, and retrieve, if necessary. The village was small, comprised primarily of fishing families. Economic conditions were poor. Medical resources were limited. Records indicated a history of illness related to water contamination and malnutrition. Upon arrival, I noted an absence of expected symptoms. The population appeared well-nourished. Physical movement was unlabored. Children exhibited no visible signs of respiratory illness. Older residents showed mobility inconsistent with their reported age. The local priest greeted me warmly. He appeared tired, but not strained. He did not speak of miracles. He spoke of stability. The anomaly was located beneath the village chapel. During routine maintenance, workers had uncovered a stone recess beneath the altar. Within it rested an object wrapped in cloth. No inscriptions were present. No symbols were carved into the surrounding stone. The object had not been disturbed. The priest explained that the village had elected to leave it untouched following its discovery. No formal report had been made initially. Only after several months of observable improvement had correspondence been sent. No prayers had been directed toward the object. No rituals had been performed. It remained beneath the chapel, undisturbed. I requested to observe the object in situ before making any determination. The priest agreed. We descended into the chapel after sunset. The recess was accessed through a concealed panel. The air below was cool but not stagnant. There was no odor of decay or damp. The cloth was removed. The object was simple in appearance. A smooth, stone-like form, oval in shape, roughly the size of a human heart. Its surface bore no markings. It emitted no light. It produced no sound. I experienced no physiological response, no fear, no warmth, no sensation beyond sight. I remained with the object for several minutes. There was no discernible interaction. I prayed silently. The object did not react. Over the following days, I remained in the village to observe conditions. The improvements reported were accurate. Water drawn from local wells tested cleaner than historical records indicated. Fish populations near the coast had increased. Crop yield from small plots exceeded expectations given soil quality. Medical conditions previously documented had diminished in frequency. No claims of divine intervention were made. The villagers spoke of the change plainly, as one might speak of improved weather or a good season. They did not attribute it to faith. They did not attribute it to the object. They simply acknowledged it. I conducted interviews discreetly. No one reported visions. No one reported voices. No one reported altered dreams. No one expressed a desire to access or interact with the object. It was present, that was all. I submitted an interim report, noting the absence of adverse effects. The response from Rome was brief. Proceed with retrieval. No additional clarification was provided. The priest did not resist when I informed him of the decision. He asked one question. Will it be returned? I informed him that such determinations were not made at my level. He nodded and said nothing further. The object was removed at dawn. The villagers were not informed of the time. The cloth was wrapped carefully. The object was placed into a padded case designed to prevent contact with other materials. No immediate change was observed upon removal. The chapel was sealed. I departed the village before nightfall. Addendum, 18 September 1966. Initial transport proceeded without incident. However, upon reaching the mainland, reports were received from the local diocese indicating minor disruptions. Water clarity diminished. Fish populations returned to prior levels. 2 children exhibited symptoms of respiratory infection consistent with historical patterns. No deaths reported. Addendum 3, October 1966. Further correspondence confirms a return to pre-anomaly conditions. The village priest requested information regarding the object's classification and potential return. No response was authorized. Personal note: the object demonstrated no hostility. It did not respond to prayer, nor did it provoke devotion. Its presence correlated with environmental stability and improved health outcomes. Its removal resulted in measurable regression. No explanation was offered. Supplemental entry: it is my understanding that containment protocols exist to prevent harm. In this instance, harm was not observed. I have reviewed the original instruction. It did not specify danger, only disruption. Personal note: disruption to what remains unclear. I reached the end of the entry and did not immediately turn the page. The writing was unchanged. The tone remained controlled. There was no emotional language, no declaration of doubt, only observation. And yet, something had shifted. The earlier entry had described relief at removal. This one recorded decline. The diary did not judge, but the pattern did. I closed the book carefully and returned it to the box. For the first time since finding the diaries, I did not feel curiosity driving me forward. I felt caution, not fear of what the next entry might contain, but of what it might quietly confirm. Whatever my granddad had been doing for the church, it was not as simple as guarding against evil. Some things were being removed, not because they harmed people, but because they complicated something else. I did not yet know what that something was. I reached for the next diary anyway. I chose the next diary, without thinking too much about it. The dates jumped forward several years. The cover was more worn, the corners softened from handling. Inside, the handwriting remained steady, but there were small changes, fewer flourishes, tighter spacing, as if time had encouraged efficiency. I read from the first full entry and did not stop until the end. France, 22 April, 1972. Assignment confirmed. The instruction arrived sealed and unsigned, carried by a courier rather than through standard correspondence. The location was a rural parish in southern France, 2 hours from the nearest city by road. The stated objective was observation, testimony collection, and retrieval of associated materials. The notice referenced multiple witnesses and repeat account consistency. I was instructed to travel alone. The parish consisted of a small church, surrounding homes, and farmland extending outward. The community was insular but not hostile. My arrival attracted attention due to the unfamiliar vehicle and the timing. I was received by the local priest, who appeared exhausted. He did not greet me with warmth. He greeted me with relief. The incident began 3 weeks prior, following a heavy storm that damaged farmland and a small section of road leading into the village. During the storm, several residents sought shelter in the church. The priest reported that the congregation remained inside overnight, praying and waiting for weather conditions to improve. Near dawn, several individuals claimed to have seen a figure. No one described it as an angel. No one described it as a demon. They described it as present. The first witness account came from an older woman. Her testimony was calm and consistent. She reported that the figure appeared in the nave, near the back pews, and remained motionless. She stated that it did not approach, it did not speak, it did not gesture. It simply stood, partially obscured by low light. She claimed she felt no fear. This was a repeated detail. Many reported no fear. Instead, they reported clarity. The The priest attempted to dismiss the event as exhaustion, stress, and the influence of communal prayer during extreme weather. He instructed the witnesses not to discuss the matter outside the parish. The witnesses did not comply. They did not spread rumors maliciously. They spoke as people do when something unusual occurs, quietly, insistently, unable to stop themselves from bringing it up. Within days, outside visitors began arriving to ask questions. The priest then contacted the diocese. The diocese contacted Rome. I conducted interviews. The number of witnesses was higher than initially reported. Accounts varied in minor details but matched in structure. The figure appeared near dawn, remained still, did not speak, did not approach, did not respond to prayer, was not associated with fear. Was followed by a shared sense of calm, lasting several hours. The priest noted that, after the event, attendance at Mass increased. Not due to excitement, due to quiet certainty. This was another repeated detail. No one asked for miracles. No one asked for healing. No one requested blessings. They came to the church and sat in silence. The priest reported that even those who had not witnessed the figure behaved differently afterward. They spoke less, argued less, drank less. They appeared steadier. The priest described it as peace, but he did not sound comforted by the word. I inspected the church. No physical anomalies were discovered. No markings, no residue, no damage. However, behind the altar, I noted an object not recorded in the parish inventory. A small wooden box placed among routine storage items. It contained folded papers, each bearing a witness statement written by the priest, signed by the individuals. These documents constituted the associated materials referenced in the instruction. I was authorized to retrieve them. The priest hesitated when I informed him of the retrieval. He did not refuse. He asked why. I provided the authorized explanation: central review, classification, and preservation. He asked whether the witness statements would be returned. I stated that such decisions were not made at my level. He then asked a question he did not appear to intend to ask aloud. If it was good, he said, why do you need it quiet? I did not answer. Not because I had no response. Because silence is sometimes the only authorized response. I retrieved the witness statements and secured them in a sealed case. I instructed the priest to advise the community not to engage visitors. I advised that further discussion would result in misinterpretation and harm. The priest did not agree. He did not argue. He simply watched. That evening, I remained in the parish lodging. During the night, I heard voices outside. Not raised, not angry, low, persistent. Many. At dawn, I looked through the window and observed a group gathered in the churchyard. Approximately 40 individuals. They were not holding signs. They were not shouting. They were simply present, waiting. The priest joined me at the door. They know you're taking it, he said. How? I asked. I told no one, he replied. Then, after a pause, he added, but they know anyway. I attempted departure at mid-morning. The vehicle was prepared. The sealed case was placed in the boot. The road was clear. When I reached the edge of the churchyard, several individuals stepped forward calmly and stood in my path. No aggression. No weapons, only quiet refusal. I stopped the vehicle. I exited and spoke to them. I explained that the documents were being removed for preservation, not destruction. I stated that nothing was being taken from them that would not be properly stored. One man, middle-aged, hands rough from labor, responded evenly. We gave our names, he said. We gave our words, and now they will disappear. I stated that they would not disappear. He shook his head. They always do, he replied. This suggested prior knowledge or experience beyond the scope of this parish. A woman stepped forward next. She did not demand the case back. She asked only one question. Will you tell them, she said, that it didn't hurt us? I confirmed that I would include the absence of harm in my report. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, they won't like that. The group remained in front of the vehicle, not as a threat, as a barrier. They did not appear afraid of consequences. Their calmness made negotiation difficult. It was not stubbornness, it was certainty. The priest attempted to reason with them. He spoke of order, of obedience, of the dangers of gossip and spectacle. They listened respectfully, then resumed standing in my way. One of the younger men, barely an adult, spoke quietly. "You can take the paper," he said, "but you can't take what we saw." This was said without anger. As a fact, I remained outside for 2 hours. No escalation occurred. No compromise was offered. The group did not disperse. Visitors arrived and joined them, as if drawn by something unspoken. By midday, the number exceeded 60. I assessed that forced removal would create the spectacle I was instructed to prevent. I was required to avoid publicity. I returned to the parish lodging. Addendum: 2-3 April 1972. At 3:12, I left the lodging with the sealed case. I did not inform the priest. The churchyard was empty. The road remained clear. Departure proceeded without incident. I reached the main road by 4:06. At 6:20, I stopped at a roadside station. I checked the boot. The sealed case was intact. However, the interior contents were altered. The witness statements remained present, but each signature line was blank. Names removed. Ink absent, as if never written. The priest's handwriting remained. The statements remained. Only the names were missing. I verified no moisture damage, no physical interference, no tampering with the seal. The change could not be explained by environmental factors. I continued travel to Rome. Upon arrival, the case was transferred as instructed. I submitted an immediate report documenting the alteration. No response was given in my presence. I was informed only that the material would be handled. Personal note: the witnesses resisted removal, not with fear, but with certainty. Their certainty did not prevent the loss of their names. The removal occurred regardless of physical custody. This suggests that the event was not contained within paper, nor within memory. It may be contained within attention. The more quietly it is handled, the less it resists. I returned the diary to the box and sat for a long time. Even at the end, my granddad didn't write emotion into the record. He didn't claim he was afraid, but the phrase that stayed with me was simple. Names removed, not crossed out. Not hidden, removed. As though the world itself had decided certain details should not survive. I closed the lid, and I knew I would read the next entry soon. By this point, I understood that the order mattered, not just chronologically, but morally. The entries were not random. They formed a sequence, not of events, but of understanding. This diary fell between 2 others I had already read. Its cover was darker, the spine reinforced, as if it had been handled more often. The opening pages showed revisions, words overwritten carefully, sentences adjusted rather than crossed out. When I began reading, I understood why. Hungary, the 11th of November, 1978. Assignment confirmed the instruction was delivered in person. No written notice was provided. No location was initially named. I was asked only whether I was prepared to travel immediately, and without delegation. I confirmed that I was. Only then was the destination disclosed. The location was a rural settlement near the border, isolated by terrain and limited infrastructure. Population records indicated gradual decline over several decades. The local parish remained active, though attendance had decreased steadily. The incident prompting intervention was not described as an anomaly. It was described as escalation. Initial reports referenced disturbances during evening services. These included interruptions, vocalizations, and behavioral changes among attendees. Early assessments attributed the events to stress, alcohol use, or external agitation. Subsequent reports contradicted this. Witnesses began attending services not out of faith, but anticipation. This was the first noted deviation. I arrived during the late afternoon. The village was quiet. Shops were open but unattended. Individuals stood in doorways or along the road, watching. No one approached. The parish priest met me outside the church. He appeared pale, his movements controlled but strained. He did not offer hospitality. He did not ask why I had come. He said only, "It is stronger now." The church showed signs of frequent use. Candles burned constantly. The pews were worn smooth in places where people leaned forward repeatedly. The air carried the residue of incense layered too thickly, as if used to cover something else. The priest explained the progression. At first, there had been sounds. Low murmurs during prayer. Unattributed voices speaking fragments of scripture. These were dismissed as echoes or suggestion. Then came responses. Individuals began reporting that prayers were being answered, not through change, through acknowledgement. The phenomenon did not manifest as a figure. There was no visible presence. Instead, there was reaction. When prayers were spoken aloud, the air in the nave would shift. Candles would gutter without wind. Individuals reported the sensation of being addressed directly, though no words were heard. This attention became desirable. Attendance increased. The priest attempted to restrict access. This failed. People arrived from neighboring villages. They came not to worship, but to be seen, to speak, to be noticed. The first incident of harm occurred 6 days prior to my arrival. A man collapsed during evening prayer. No physical injury was evident. He remained conscious but unresponsive for several hours. When he recovered, he reported no pain, only exhaustion. He returned the following evening. This pattern repeated. I conducted observation during service. The church was full, not with reverence, with expectancy. People spoke prayers louder than necessary. Some repeated phrases. Others improvised, abandoning traditional structure. The priest attempted to maintain order. He was ignored. At a specific point during the service, always the same, the atmosphere shifted. The candles dimmed. The sound changed, not louder, more focused. Individuals leaned forward instinctively, as if toward a speaker. Several began to cry. Not from distress, from recognition. I felt it then, not fear, pressure, a narrowing of attention, as if the space itself had learned where to look. I did not pray. The sensation did not lessen. After the service, I requested access to the church alone. The priest agreed, though he warned that the phenomenon did not require an audience. This warning proved accurate. Alone in the nave, the pressure increased. I did not speak. I did not move. I observed. The sensation intensified regardless. This suggested that participation was not required. Only presence. I withdrew. The pressure receded. This withdrawal was immediate. This behavior was documented. Further investigation revealed historical precedent. Records indicated similar occurrences in the region, approximately every 70 to 90 years. Each instance followed the same progression: initial manifestation, growing attendance, behavioral fixation, eventual decline of population. No records described resolution, only abandonment. The local diocese had attempted intervention. Standard rites produced no effect. Prayers neither diminished nor aggravated the phenomenon. Suppression of information had slowed escalation but had not stopped it. I requested authorization for retrieval or containment. Approval was immediate. No conditions were attached. The object associated with the phenomenon was not an artifact. It was not located beneath the church. It was not physical. Containment required deprivation. The instruction was explicit: reduce exposure, remove attention, eliminate recognition. The church was closed the following morning. The priest announced structural instability. Services were suspended. Candles were extinguished. Icons were covered. The building was sealed. The reaction was immediate. Crowds gathered. People protested. Not violently, desperately. They demanded access. They begged. Some offered money. Others offered silence. None of this altered the instruction. Within hours, symptoms escalated. Individuals who had attended most frequently exhibited withdrawal, agitation, and insomnia. Several collapsed outside the church doors. Emergency services were overwhelmed. No cause could be identified. The pressure did not cease. It migrated. Reports emerged of disturbances in homes where individuals prayed aloud. The phenomenon followed attention. Containment escalated. Residents were advised to cease prayer entirely. This instruction was not well received. However, compliance increased after further deterioration. Over several days, the effect diminished. As attention waned, symptoms receded. The pressure lessened. The phenomenon weakened. One final incident occurred. A group of individuals entered the sealed church at night. They lit candles. They spoke. Witnesses reported a surge in intensity. By morning, 3 were unresponsive. 1 did not recover. The church was permanently closed. The building was deconsecrated. The site was removed from maps and parish schedules. Residents relocated gradually. Within a year, the village population had halved. Within 5, it was largely abandoned. Personal note: this presence was not benevolent. It did not heal. It did not guide. It did not demand worship. It required recognition. Attention strengthened it. Silence diminished it. This was not a being that could be reasoned with. It could only be starved. Supplemental note: containment was necessary. Failure to act would have resulted in further loss of life. The cost of intervention was high. The cost of inaction would have been higher. I closed the diary slowly. For the first time since I began reading, I felt no uncertainty about the church's decision. This entry was clear. Whatever else my granddad had encountered, this was something that needed to be stopped. And yet, the method had been the same. Removal, silence, erasure. The same tools used when the outcome had been harm, and when it had been help. The difference was not in the action, it was in the justification. I placed the diary back in the box. Episode 5 did not resolve my confusion. It deepened it. I did not open this diary immediately. The cover bore a faint indentation, as though something heavy had rested against it for a long time. The pages were thicker, the paper slightly rougher. The ink showed variation, not rushed, but pressed more firmly in places. When I began reading, the shift was subtle, but it was there. Northern Ireland, 6 February 1984. Assignment issued. The instruction arrived through standard channels, but with amended language. The destination was a coastal town, with active parish infrastructure and stable population records. No prior incidents of note had been recorded. No anomalies had been flagged historically. The assignment referenced a request for evaluation rather than retrieval. This distinction was noted. Initial reports described a pattern of recurring events rather than a single occurrence. Individuals attending early morning services reported shared dreams following prayer. These dreams were consistent across multiple accounts, but were not accompanied by distress. The dreams involved location, not narrative. The sea, the horizon, a sensation of waiting. The local priest initially dismissed the reports as coincidence. However, frequency increased. Attendance at morning services doubled within 2 weeks. The dreams continued. No physical manifestations were observed. No voices were reported. No behavioral fixation developed. This absence of escalation was noted. I arrived during the first week of February. The town was functional. Shops open, roads maintained. No signs of strain. The priest received me with courtesy and mild embarrassment. He expressed concern that the reports might be wasting my time. He described the phenomenon carefully, as if choosing neutral language might lessen its significance. I conducted interviews. Witnesses described the dreams in near-identical terms. The sea was calm. The sky was overcast. No figures appeared. No messages were conveyed, they reported. Waking with a sense of clarity and resolve. Several mentioned having made decisions following the dreams. None regretted those decisions. Examples included reconciliation with estranged family, cessation of long-standing disputes, voluntary reductions in alcohol consumption, renewed commitment to routine prayer. No individual reported compulsion. No individual reported loss of autonomy. I attended morning service. The church was quiet. The atmosphere was unremarkable. There was no pressure, no distortion, no sensation of attention. Prayer proceeded normally. That night, I slept in parish lodging. I experienced the dream, the sea, the horizon, the sensation of waiting. No fear, no command, no voice. The following morning, I reviewed my notes. The phenomenon did not behave as prior cases. There was no escalation, no dependency, no harm. If anything, the effects appeared stabilizing. I submitted an interim report indicating absence of threat. The response from Rome was delayed. This was unusual. Over the next several days, I remained in the town. The dreams persisted. No new elements emerged. The priest expressed relief rather than concern. He did not ask for intervention. He asked whether he should discourage discussion. I advised neutrality. On the 7th day, instruction arrived. Proceed with containment. No retrieval was specified. No justification was offered. I reviewed the instruction carefully. Containment without retrieval implied information control. This was consistent with previous assignments. However, the absence of escalation conflicted with established criteria. I requested clarification. The response was brief. Proceed without delay. I did not proceed immediately. This was the first deviation from protocol. I did not refuse. I waited. During the delay, I observed further outcomes. A long-standing dispute between two fishing families was resolved voluntarily. A man who had not attended church in years returned without prompting. Several individuals described feeling settled. No one sought explanation. No one attempted to amplify the phenomenon. It remained contained by nature. I slept again. The dream repeated. This time, the horizon appeared closer. Still no voice. Still no fear. I reviewed historical records. No prior incidents in the region matched the pattern exactly. However, several coastal parishes across different eras referenced periods of quiet clarity following communal prayer. These had not been classified as anomalies. They had been absorbed. I drafted a second report. It was longer, more detailed. It emphasized the absence of harm. It noted positive outcomes. It recommended continued observation rather than containment. The response was immediate. Containment is required. No explanation followed. The priest noticed the delay. He did not question it directly. He asked instead whether I intended to leave soon. I told him I had not yet concluded my work. He nodded and said nothing further. Containment measures were enacted gradually. The priest was advised to discourage discussion of dreams. He complied reluctantly. Morning services were rescheduled. Attendance declined slightly. The dreams continued. As discussion diminished, the dreams became less frequent. Not abruptly, gradually. Individuals reported disappointment, not distress, a sense of something unfinished. No negative symptoms developed. No harm occurred. After 2 weeks, the dream ceased. The town returned to baseline. Function remained stable. The priest resumed routine operations. No further reports were submitted. Final report: containment successful. No adverse outcomes recorded. Personal note: this case did not meet prior criteria for intervention. No harm was observed. No escalation occurred. Containment was applied regardless. This suggests that absence of danger is not sufficient grounds for allowance. Stability alone may constitute disruption. Supplemental note: I delayed compliance by 11 days. This delay did not result in harm. The phenomenon resolved naturally when attention diminished. This raises questions regarding necessity. I closed the diary with care. This was the first time my granddad had acknowledged delay. Not defiance, delay. A pause long enough to observe consequences. Long enough to see that nothing terrible happened when the church waited. I placed the diary back in the box and sat quietly. The pattern was no longer theoretical. Containment was not always about safety. Sometimes it was about control. And sometimes my granddad had noticed. I opened the next diary and began reading without choosing it for any reason other than sequence. The cover was lighter, the leather less polished, as if it had been carried more often than it had been stored. The first pages were clean. No revisions, no overwriting. The ink was steady, but the lines ran closer together than before. Whatever this entry contained, it had not been rewritten, it had been recorded. SPAIN 19 August 1987 assignment. Issued: the instruction arrived, with standard authority, but unusual emphasis. The destination was a mountainous region in northern Spain. Access was limited. The nearest town was several hours by road. The parish served multiple small villages across the surrounding valleys. The assignment referenced pattern escalation and interruption of ordinary sleep. This language was noted. Initial reports described a series of waking events occurring across multiple households. Residents reported waking at the same time each night, approximately 3:17. The waking was not gradual, it was immediate. Individuals described opening their eyes as if prompted by a sound, though no sound was present. Upon waking, many reported a sensation of being watched. No figures were observed. No voices were heard. The sensation persisted until sunrise. The local priest reported a rapid increase in confession requests, not for sins, for thoughts that did not feel like their own. The priest's language was precise. He described recurring phrases spoken internally by residents, identical across households. He did not record these phrases in his correspondence. He stated only that they were not suitable for transmission. I traveled immediately. Upon arrival, I met with the priest, who appeared sleep-deprived and physically diminished. His hands trembled slightly as he poured water. He did not ask polite questions. He asked whether I had come to stop it. The village was quiet in daylight. Residents appeared functional, but fatigued. Several wore religious symbols, openly, not as devotion, but as armor. Individuals stood in groups, speaking softly, then falling silent when approached. The priest explained the first deviation. Initially, residents woke at 3:17 and remained in bed, fearful but unmoving. After 4 nights, several began rising without conscious intent. They would stand in their homes, facing windows or doors, and remain there until dawn. After 7 nights, some left their homes. They walked into fields or onto roads and stood facing the mountains. They did not speak. They did not respond. They returned at sunrise. They reported no memory of leaving. No injuries occurred during early phases. No external threat was observed. However, the behavior suggested progression. I conducted interviews. Witness accounts were consistent. Residents described waking with the certainty that something had called them, though no sound existed. They described the sensation of a thought being placed gently into the mind, not force, not pain. Guidance. This word was used repeatedly. Guidance. The priest admitted he had attempted intervention. He performed standard rites. He led communal prayer. He encouraged residents to remain inside their homes. None of these measures prevented waking. Prayer did not intensify it, nor did it diminish it. The phenomenon appeared indifferent to religious practice. I remained in the parish lodging overnight. At 3:17, I woke. The waking was immediate. No dream preceded it. My eyes opened as if I had been tapped on the shoulder. I lay still and listened. There was no sound. There was only awareness. A sensation of attention directed toward the mind rather than the body. A thought appeared, simple and quiet. Come. It was not my thought. I recognized that instantly, not because it was loud, but because it was complete, without origin. I did not rise. I remained in bed and recited prayers silently. The sensation did not lessen. The thought repeated, not louder, not urgent. Come. I experienced no fear. This was noted. The absence of fear was itself concerning. At sunrise, the sensation ceased completely. No residual symptoms remained. I submitted an interim report, requesting authorization for escalation. The response from Rome was delayed. This delay was unusual given the assignment's original emphasis. I remained in the village to observe further progression. On the 9th night, escalation occurred. At 3:17, multiple residents left their homes simultaneously. They walked toward the mountain path leading to a narrow gorge. The priest and several men attempted to intercept them. Interception was ineffective. The residents did not resist physically. They did not acknowledge being blocked. They simply continued walking, adjusting direction slightly to bypass obstacles. Like water around stone, their faces remained neutral, their eyes open, their breathing steady. They did not speak. Several residents reached the gorge. The gorge contained an old structure, a ruin referenced only briefly in local history. Once a hermitage, abandoned centuries earlier, little remained beyond stone walls and a partial archway. The residents entered the ruin and stood motionless. No incident occurred. At sunrise, they left and returned home. They reported no memory. The priest was alarmed, not due to violence, due to pattern. He stated that the ruin had not been visited by residents in living memory. It held no religious significance now. Children were warned away due to unstable stone. Yet the residents had walked to it without hesitation, in darkness, across uneven ground, without injury. This suggested guidance beyond normal capacity. On the 10th night, the guidance intensified. Residents did not merely stand. Some knelt within the ruin. Others placed their hands on the stone floor, as if listening. One woman began to cry quietly, without visible distress. No one comforted her. No one reacted. The group remained focused on the same point. The priest attempted to enter the ruin. As he crossed the threshold, he stopped abruptly and stepped back. He later reported a sensation of pressure in the skull, accompanied by nausea and immediate fatigue. He did not describe fear. He described warning. This distinction was noted. One attempted entry. At the threshold, I experienced pressure similar to that described by the priest, concentrated behind the eyes. The sensation was not painful, but persuasive, like standing too close to machinery operating at frequencies beyond hearing. I stepped back. The pressure diminished immediately. I sent a second request to Rome. This message was direct. The phenomenon was escalating. Individuals were being guided toward a specific location. The location exerted deterrence against conscious approach. The pattern suggested an objective. The response arrived 2 days later. It contained only 2 lines. Containment is authorized. Proceed without delay. No further instruction was offered. Containment required physical intervention. The ruin needed to be rendered inaccessible. This was consistent with my prior experiences of deprivation-based containment. However, unlike previous cases, the guidance here operated through residence, sleep, and memory. Closing the path would not prevent waking. It would only redirect movement. This risk was noted. The priest offered local assistance. Several men agreed to help. The plan was to block access to the gorge path and to seal the ruin entrance with heavy timber and stone. Work began at dawn. By evening, the path was obstructed. The ruin entrance was partially sealed. At 3:17, residents woke. They left their homes. They walked toward the gorge. They reached the obstruction. They stopped. And then, without hesitation, they turned. Not confused. Not searching. They turned as if the alternative route had already been known. They began walking toward a different valley. This was the moment the cost of waiting became clear. The guidance had not been leading them to a place. It had been leading them to an outcome. The ruin had been one method. Now another method was selected. We followed at distance. The residents walked for several hours, through terrain that would have been difficult, even in daylight. They did not tire. They did not stumble. Their movement remained steady, identical across individuals. They reached a cliffside overlooking a narrow river. There, without pausing, 3 individuals stepped forward, not jumped, stepped, as if descending stairs that were not present. 2 died. 1 survived with severe injury. The remaining residents stood motionless until sunrise, then returned home. They reported no memory. They expressed confusion only when informed of the deaths. Their grief was genuine. Their denial was absolute. Containment had failed. Not because action was taken, because action was taken late. The guidance had progressed beyond one location. It had become adaptive. I reported the deaths immediately. Rome's response was not delayed this time. Escalate. No further instruction was provided. Escalation required a different method, not physical sealing, not information control. The guidance operated through attention placed during sleep. It fed on compliance. It strengthened through repetition. Therefore, the only viable containment was interruption of the pattern. That night, residents were kept awake, not by force, by communal gathering. Lights remained on in the church. People sat together. They spoke. They prayed. They drank water and watched the clock like it was an enemy. At 3:17, no one was asleep. No one woke. The guidance had no entry. The pressure in the air increased briefly at that time, perceptible even to those without prior sensitivity. Several residents reported sudden headaches. One child began to cry without reason. Then it passed. At sunrise, the town remained intact. We repeated the method for 3 nights. No further deaths occurred. However, fatigue increased rapidly. Residents could not remain awake indefinitely. The priest's health deteriorated. Several elderly individuals collapsed from exhaustion. Containment through wakefulness was unsustainable. I requested additional support. Support arrived in the form of instruction. A final option, one I had not been offered before. Proceed with redaction. This was not explained. I understood it anyway. Redaction was performed through ritual, documentation, and denial. Residents were instructed not merely to stay awake, but to treat the phenomenon as non-existent, to avoid discussion, to avoid shared language, to sever the collective pattern. The priest resisted initially, then he complied, because 2 people were dead. Over the next weeks, the village returned gradually to baseline. Waking events diminished. The thoughts ceased appearing. Residents slept. Some reported anxiety without cause. Others reported grief without memory. No one could articulate why. This was noted. Final report: containment successful following escalation and redaction. Casualties recorded. Guidance ceased. Location remains blocked. Parish advised to limit discussion indefinitely. Personal note: delay resulted in death. Containment required not only physical measures, but alteration of communal attention. The guidance was adaptive. It selected outcomes when pathways were blocked. This suggests intelligence. Not necessarily malicious, but indifferent to human cost. Supplemental note: I do not know whether the ruin was a threshold or a restraint. I do not know whether the guidance sought release or connection. I know only that it used the minds of ordinary people to accomplish its objective, and that waiting to act allowed it to progress. I closed the diary. I did not turn to the next one immediately. The pattern was no longer abstract. Delay could be merciful in one case and fatal in another. The church's urgency was not always control. Sometimes it was necessity. And the worst part was that I could now see how easily a person could confuse the two. I returned the diary to the box and sat quietly. Then I reached for the next. Greece, 2nd of May 1991. One assignment confirmed the request did not arrive as an instruction. It arrived as a question. This deviation was noted immediately. The correspondence referenced no incident, no anomaly, and no escalation. Instead, it described a condition that had developed gradually within a coastal monastery under joint ecclesiastical oversight. The stated concern was not behavior, it was belief. The monastery had operated continuously for over 8 centuries. Its records were complete, its line of succession intact. No deviations from doctrine had been recorded in its modern history. The monks residing there were known for adherence to structure and routine. No reports of dissent or theological dispute had been submitted. This changed over the course of 1 year. The initial report was subtle. Several monks had altered their language during prayer, not the prayers themselves. The interpretation: they continued to recite approved scripture, but their explanations during instruction began to shift. Words traditionally associated with divine authority were replaced with terms denoting balance, preservation, and restraint. God was still referenced, but differently. The abbot initially viewed this as philosophical drift. He encouraged correction through study. The monks complied. The language continued to change. A second report followed. Monks began disagreeing with certain passages of doctrine, not openly, but through omission. They would pause before reciting specific verses, then continue without comment. No refusal occurred. No protest, only adjustment. I was instructed to observe and evaluate. No retrieval was requested. This was unusual. I arrived by sea. The monastery stood above the shoreline, weathered but well maintained. The approach was steep, the stone steps worn smooth by centuries of passage. The abbot received me personally. He was calm, articulate, and unafraid. This was noted. He did not deny the reports. He contextualized them. The brothers have not lost faith, he said. They have refined it. I asked him to explain. He smiled gently and said, "That is why you are here." The changes had begun after the discovery of a chamber beneath the oldest wing of the monastery. This chamber had not been sealed. It had been forgotten. The chamber contained no object, no text, no artifact. It was empty. This absence was emphasized repeatedly in the abbot's explanation. The monks had begun using the chamber for silent contemplation, not prayer, not study. Silence. This was permitted initially. Silence had always been part of monastic practice. However, those who spent extended time in the chamber began reporting a sensation of alignment. This word appeared frequently in the correspondence. alignment with what was not specified. I requested to speak with the monks individually. They complied willingly. No attempt was made to coordinate responses. This transparency was noted. Each monk described a similar experience. Silence in the chamber felt different, not louder, not deeper, clearer. Thoughts slowed, emotional responses softened, certainty diminished. One monk described it as prayer without direction. Another called it listening without expectation. None described visions. None described voices. None claimed revelation. Their theological shift did not involve rejection of God. It involved repositioning. They spoke of God not as ruler, but as boundary. Not as authority, but as stabilizer. Not creator of all things, but guardian against imbalance. This language was consistent across interviews. No instruction had been given. No text had been shared. No leader had guided interpretation. The abbot admitted concern, not because the monks were unstable, but because they were calm. To calm, I requested access to the chamber. The abbot hesitated briefly, then agreed. The chamber was accessed via a narrow passage beneath the eastern wing. No symbols marked the entrance. The stone was plain, worn, and cool to the touch. Inside, the chamber was circular, empty. The walls bore no inscriptions. The floor was bare stone. The air was still. I entered alone. I did not pray. I did not sit. I stood. The sensation did not arrive immediately. There was no pressure, no sound, no shift in temperature. After several minutes, a change occurred. Not external, internal. The boundaries between thoughts softened. Concepts usually held as fixed became negotiable. Certainty loosened. I did not feel compelled. I did not feel addressed. I felt unanchored. I exited the chamber. After approximately 10 minutes, the abbot observed me closely. He asked only one question. "Did it speak to you?" I answered truthfully. "No," he nodded, as if that were expected. Over the following days, I observed daily life within the monastery. The monks continued their duties. They maintained discipline. They followed schedule. Nothing outwardly changed. However, sermons delivered by the abbot shifted subtly. They emphasized humility, not as obedience, but as restraint. They spoke of faith as protection rather than command. The monks listened attentively. No dissent occurred. I reviewed doctrinal texts with several monks. They engaged thoughtfully. When confronted with contradictions, they did not defend tradition reflexively. They considered context. This behavior was not heretical. It was analytical. I submitted an interim report. It stated, "No evidence of external influence, no object or text present, no coercion observed, no harm recorded." The response from Rome was delayed. On the fourth day, a new development occurred. A visiting cleric arrived unannounced. He attended services. He observed. He did not engage. The following morning, the abbot was informed that the chamber would be sealed. No explanation was provided. The instruction was absolute. The abbot requested justification. He was denied. He requested delay. He was denied. The monks complied without protest. The chamber was sealed, using stone and mortar. No ceremony accompanied the act. The effect was immediate, not violent, not dramatic. Immediate. Within hours, several monks reported disorientation, not confusion, loss. A sensation described as misalignment. They did not attempt to reopen the chamber. They did not resist the decision. They simply struggled. Over the next days, sermons returned to prior language. Certainty reasserted itself. Doctrine resumed its familiar structure. The monks adjusted. However, subtle changes persisted. Several monks withdrew from instruction roles. One requested reassignment. Another asked for extended silence. A third left the monastery entirely. The abbot aged visibly over the following weeks. He did not protest. He did not appeal. He simply recorded. Final report: containment successful. No further deviation observed. Theological alignment restored. Personal note: the chamber contained nothing. Yet it altered interpretation. This suggests that belief itself can be influenced without instruction. This influence did not incite rebellion. It reduced certainty. Supplemental note: certainty appears to be a stabilizing requirement for doctrine. Anything that introduces sustained ambiguity, even peacefully, is considered disruptive. Personal note: I do not believe the chamber was a source. I believe it was an absence, a space where doctrine could not anchor. Final observation: if faith requires structure to remain intact, then anything that removes that structure, even gently, becomes a threat, not because it harms, but because it changes what authority means. I closed the diary and rested my hands on the lid of the box. This entry disturbed me more than those involving death. Nothing had been attacked. Nothing had been corrupted. Nothing had been taken. Something had been understood differently. And that had been enough. I looked at the remaining diaries. There were fewer now, and I had the growing sense that the later entries would not be about retrieval at all. They would be about choice. Iceland, the 17th of October 1996. Observation requested. The correspondence was marked for review only. No instruction accompanied it. No assignment code was issued. The request originated from a regional bishop and had not yet passed through central authorization. This was irregular. The matter concerned a phenomenon described as non-disruptive and self-limiting, with no recorded incidents of harm. The bishop requested guidance on whether further reporting was necessary. No response had yet been issued. The location was a coastal settlement with a population under 200. Infrastructure was minimal. The parish consisted of a small church, a community hall, and private residences spread along the shoreline. The reported phenomenon was environmental. Specifically, a fog. The fog appeared intermittently along the coast, usually at dawn or dusk. This was not unusual for the region. However, residents reported behavioral changes associated with its presence. These changes were not distressing. This detail was emphasized repeatedly. The fog did not obscure vision beyond normal parameters. It did not produce sound. It did not induce fear. Instead, individuals who entered it reported a sensation of clarity. This term appeared in every witness account. Clarity of thought, clarity of memory, clarity of intention. The bishop expressed concern not because of harm, but because of consequence. Residents began making decisions. Permanent decisions. I traveled without authorization. This was the first time I did so. The absence of instruction did not prohibit observation. It merely removed protection. This was noted. Upon arrival, the settlement appeared functional. Fishing boats remained active. Children attended school. No signs of distress or disorder were visible. The priest received me openly. He appeared uncertain, but not alarmed. He stated that he had delayed further reporting because he did not know how to categorize what was occurring. I conducted interviews. Residents spoke freely. They did not exaggerate. They did not attempt to persuade. They described the fog plainly, as one might describe weather. Several individuals reported entering the fog intentionally, not out of curiosity, out of utility. A fisherman described standing within it before deciding to sell his boat and leave the settlement. He stated that the decision had felt complete. A woman described entering the fog before ending a long-standing relationship. She expressed relief. A young man described entering it once, then choosing never to again. He did not elaborate. No one reported compulsion. No one reported repeated exposure. The fog did not draw attention. It did not persist. It appeared, then dissipated. I entered the fog. The sensation was immediate. Not physical, cognitive. Thoughts aligned. Internal conflicts reduced. Questions that had remained unresolved for years seemed smaller. Not answered. Placed into perspective. I did not experience revelation. I experienced resolution. This distinction was noted. Upon exiting the fog, no after effects remained. Memory was intact. Emotion was stable. No desire to return developed. I documented my experience and reviewed historical data. No comparable cases were recorded. However, similar descriptions appeared sporadically in folklore and pre-Christian accounts. These were not catalogued as anomalies. They were dismissed as metaphor. The bishop contacted me during my stay. He asked whether escalation was required. I responded that I was still observing. This was technically accurate. Over the following days, the fog appeared 3 times. Each appearance coincided with significant personal decisions among residents. None of these decisions resulted in harm. Several improved conditions measurably. One case required particular attention. An elderly woman entered the fog and, upon exiting, requested to die. Not immediately, not dramatically. She requested the cessation of treatment for a chronic illness that had left her in persistent pain. She spoke calmly. Her family supported the decision. The fog did not remove her will. It clarified it. This development was reported to the bishop. He requested immediate guidance. No guidance was provided. I reviewed containment criteria. No escalation, no dependency, no harm, no spread. By established standards, intervention was unnecessary. However, precedent suggested that influence over belief in decision-making, even benevolent, could be deemed disruptive. I prepared a report. Then I did not send it. This was the first conscious deviation from protocol, not delay, withholding. Instead, I continued observation. On the 7th day, the fog appeared longer than before, approximately 40 minutes. During this period, several residents gathered near the shoreline. They did not speak. They did not enter collectively. Each person approached individually, waited, then departed. No pattern suggested communal reinforcement. I entered the fog again. This time, the sensation differed slightly. The clarity remained, but another element appeared. Awareness, not of something external, of myself, my role, my obedience. The accumulated weight of prior assignments. I exited the fog, unsettled. This reaction was new. That evening, I wrote a report. It was comprehensive. It detailed absence of harm. It documented positive outcomes. It recommended non-intervention. It requested classification as a non-anomalous environmental phenomenon. I did not send it. Instead, I drafted a second document. This one was personal, not for transmission. Personal note: the fog does not instruct. It does not persuade. It does not command. It clarifies. This clarification reduces dependency on external authority. This may be its true disruption. On the 9th day, the fog failed to appear. Residents did not react. No disappointment, no anxiety, no seeking. Life continued. On the 10th day, correspondence arrived from Rome. The report I had not sent had been anticipated. This was noted with concern. The instruction was clear. Proceed with suppression. No justification was included. Suppression required dissemination of alternative explanation. Environmental anomaly, weather pattern, psychological suggestion. The bishop was prepared to cooperate. A delayed response. This delay was not authorized. During the delay, I observed one final event. A teenage girl entered the fog. She exited visibly shaken. Later, she requested a private meeting. She stated that she would be leaving the settlement. When asked why, she said only, "It showed me what would happen if I stayed." She did not elaborate. The fog did not reappear after that day. No suppression was enacted. No explanation was distributed. I returned to Rome without submitting the report. This was recorded in my private records only. Final, ENTRY unsent. I believe this phenomenon was self-limiting. I believe intervention would have been unjustified. I believe that suppression would have caused harm by preventing necessary personal decisions. I believe this was not a presence to be contained. It was a process. I did not send this postscript. Several weeks later, I was reassigned. No mention was made of the Icelandic settlement. No record of the phenomenon exists in central archives. This absence is deliberate. Personal note: this is the first entry I have chosen not to submit. I do not know whether this constitutes disobedience or discernment. I know only that acting would have altered lives unnecessarily, and that sometimes silence protects not authority, but people. I closed the diary carefully. This was the first time my granddad had not only delayed, but chosen, not against the church, for something else. I sat with the box in front of me and realized there were only a few diaries left, and whatever came next would not be about observation. It would be about consequence. ROME 3 June 1999. Assignment reissued. The instruction arrived with formal clarity and unusual restraint. The language was precise, the tone neutral. No reference was made to previous correspondence. No acknowledgement was given regarding recent omissions. The assignment was framed as a continuation of my duties. This framing was incorrect. The destination was northern Italy, several hours inland from the coast. The site was an abandoned parish church, closed officially due to structural concerns. No congregation remained. The surrounding settlement had diminished over decades, leaving only a small number of permanent residents. The reported anomaly was minimal. The request emphasized verification, not retrieval. I was informed that I would not be traveling alone. This was a first. My assigned companion arrived the following morning. He was introduced as Brother Matteo. No surname was provided. He was younger than me by at least 15 years. His appearance was unremarkable. His manner, polite. His credentials were legitimate and complete. Too complete, this was noted. Brother Matteo did not ask about prior assignments. He did not ask about methodology. He asked only whether I preferred to travel by road or rail. This question was procedural. During travel, he observed more than he spoke. When he did speak, his questions were indirect. How long have you served? Do you find the work burdensome? Do you believe discretion is always protection? Each question was delivered casually, without insistence. Each answer I provided was factual. We arrived at the parish shortly before dusk. The church stood alone at the edge of the settlement. Its roof had partially collapsed. Windows were boarded. The grounds were overgrown. No activity was visible. The reported anomaly consisted of a single recurring observation. Residents passing near the church reported hearing singing, not hymns. Wordless vocalization, low, sustained. The reports were inconsistent in timing, but consistent in description. No one reported fear. No one attempted entry. Brother Matteo requested to conduct the initial inspection alone. This request was notable. I did not object. He returned after approximately 20 minutes. He reported no findings, no sound, no sensation, no structural anomaly. That evening, we remained in the settlement. I observed Brother Matteo closely. He took notes. He recorded times. He asked questions of residents, then recorded their answers verbatim. He did not interpret. This restraint was deliberate. At night, I heard the singing. It was faint, intermittent, not directional. It did not originate from the church itself. It appeared to emanate from the surrounding area, as if the structure were reflecting something already present. Brother Matteo did not react. He continued writing. The following morning, I requested joint inspection. Brother Matteo agreed. We entered the church together. The interior was dim and unstable. No markings, no objects, no residual scent. The acoustics were unusual. Sound lingered longer than expected. We stood in silence. No singing occurred. Upon exit, Brother Matteo made an observation. The reports emphasize recurrence, he said, not presence. This distinction was accurate. Over the next 2 days, we observed, without intervention, the singing occurred sporadically. No pattern emerged. Residents did not gather. No attention accumulated. The phenomenon remained contained by disinterest. Brother Matteo submitted his report early. I reviewed it. It was factual, complete. It included no recommendation. On the third night, I heard the singing again. This time, closer, not louder, more defined. I followed the sound. It led not to the church, but to a small hillside overlooking the settlement. There, I observed an elderly man seated alone, humming softly. He appeared unaware of my presence. The man later reported that he had been remembering someone. No further explanation was provided. The humming ceased. I documented this interaction. Brother Matteo did not. This discrepancy was noted. The following morning, Brother Matteo requested a private conversation. He was direct. You have withheld reports before, he said. This was not phrased as accusation. It was a statement. I did not deny it, he continued. You believe discretion can serve individuals as well as institutions. This phrasing suggested prior review of my record. I responded carefully. I stated that discretion was situational. This response was non-committal. Brother Matteo nodded. Then he asked the question I had anticipated. Do you believe the church should always intervene? I answered honestly, no. He accepted this answer without reaction. This was concerning. Later that day, we received instruction. The anomaly was to be classified as non-actionable. No further monitoring required. The case was closed. Brother Matteo appeared satisfied. I was not. Before departure, Brother Matteo requested one final inspection of the church. He asked that I remain outside. This request was not optional. He entered alone. He remained inside for longer than before. Approximately 40 minutes. When he emerged, his expression had changed. Not dramatically, subtly, he appeared. Steadied. During travel back to Rome, Brother Matteo spoke more freely. He described his training, his role, his purpose. He was not assigned to observe anomalies. He was assigned to observe people, specifically, individuals who had begun to demonstrate discretionary behavior. This work requires judgment, he said. Judgment creates variance. Variance requires oversight. This explanation was delivered calmly. I asked whether he was assigned to observe me. He did not answer directly. Instead, he said, "You are not alone in your concerns." This statement lacked reassurance. Upon return to Rome, Brother Matteo submitted a second report. This one I did not see. I was reassigned. No reason was provided. The new assignment was administrative, temporary. This was noted. Personal note oversight has been initiated. This suggests that discretion is now considered a variable, requiring control. This was inevitable. Supplemental note: Brother Matteo is not hostile, he is sincere. This makes him effective. Observation: the Church does not eliminate dissent. It absorbs it, then studies it. Final note: I do not believe Brother Matteo is my adversary. I believe he is my mirror. He exists to determine whether I remain aligned. I closed the diary and leaned back, exhaling slowly. This entry frightened me more than any other. Not because of the anomaly, but because the work had turned inward. My granddad had gone from observing the unknown to being observed himself. There were only 2 diaries left, and I had the growing sense that whatever happened next would not be written as calmly. Switzerland, the 14th of February 2002. Assignment issued. The instruction was brief. No context was provided. No prior correspondence referenced. The assignment code was unfamiliar, though formatted correctly. The location was a mountain region bordering 2 diocesan jurisdictions, historically neutral territory used for mediation and retreat. The instruction contained 1 deviation, no written record required. This deviation was not explained. I was informed that Brother Matteo would not accompany me. This was noted. The reported anomaly concerned a structure uncovered during avalanche mitigation work. The structure was not ecclesiastical in origin. It predated known settlement records. No symbols associated with recognized belief systems were present. Local authorities reported no disturbance. The church became involved only after a cleric requested guidance regarding persistent calm. This phrasing was unusual. I arrived during heavy snowfall. The site was inaccessible by vehicle. I proceeded on foot with local assistance. The structure was partially exposed. Stonework revealed beneath ice and debris. It did not resemble a dwelling. It did not resemble a shrine. It resembled a chamber. The structure had no entrance in the conventional sense. Only an opening, not carved, not forced, exposed. Inside the chamber was intact. No artifacts, no inscriptions, no remains. The space was circular, with smooth stone walls and a recessed floor. The air was still, not cold. I experienced the sensation immediately. Not pressure, not attention, relief. This reaction was noted with concern. Local workers reported similar responses. They described the site as quiet, not empty. Quiet. Several requested reassignment after exposure. Not out of fear, out of reluctance to leave. I requested solitude. This was granted. Inside the chamber, the sensation deepened. Thoughts slowed, memories softened. Not erased, unburdened. I did not pray. I did not think of doctrine. I thought of nothing. This was unprecedented. I remained for approximately 20 minutes. No escalation occurred. No instruction manifested. No voice emerged. The chamber did not react. It simply existed. Upon exit, I recorded physiological data. Heart rate normal. No dizziness. No nausea. No after effects. The local cleric expressed concern. He did not fear contamination. He feared removal. This place, he said, is not ours. This was stated as fact, not complaint. I reviewed criteria for containment. The chamber did not influence behavior beyond temporary calm. No dependency developed. No pattern of return was observed. Individuals did not congregate. The anomaly was passive. I submitted no report. This was intentional. 2 days later, correspondence arrived. It referenced the location precisely. This indicated independent awareness. The instruction was explicit. Seal the chamber. Erase the site. No documentation. This instruction conflicted with protocol. Sealing was appropriate for harmful anomalies. Erasure was reserved for disruptive belief systems. This was neither. I delayed. This delay was not authorized. During the delay, I returned to the chamber. This time, the sensation differed. Not stronger, clearer. I understood then why written record was discouraged. Language reduced the experience. Any description would distort it. I realized the chamber did not do anything. It removed something. Noise, not sound. Internal noise. This was not a presence. It was an absence. Absence does not align with doctrine. Doctrine requires structure. I received a second instruction. This one signed. Brother Matteo's seal was present. Proceed immediately. You are not authorized to evaluate. I prepared to comply. Then I did not. Instead, I altered the report. I recorded the chamber as structurally unstable. I reported collapse risk. I recommended restricted access without sealing. This report was technically accurate. The chamber was exposed. Avalanche risk was genuine. I submitted the report. It was accepted. Sealing was postponed indefinitely. The site was reclassified as hazardous terrain. No ecclesiastical intervention followed. This was the first time I actively misdirected classification. Not delayed. Not withheld. Altered. Personal note, this chamber does not threaten faith. It threatens certainty. It offers relief without instruction. This cannot be reconciled with authority. Supplemental note, I believe the chamber predates belief systems. It is not aligned against them. It exists independently. Final entry unlogged, I am aware that this constitutes deception. I am also aware that removal would constitute harm. Between the two, I have chosen harm to the institution rather than harm to the individual. This choice was not made lightly. I closed the diary with hands that did not shake. That frightened me. Not because I felt guilt, but because I felt calm. The same calm the chamber had offered. I placed the diary back into the box and sat for a long time without moving. This was no longer a story about ambiguity. My granddad had crossed a boundary, not against the church, against inevitability. There was one diary left, and I suspected it would not describe an assignment at all. I have deliberately left the heading blank. This is not an omission. It is the final instruction I am giving myself. There are no new assignments. There have been none for several months. No explanations were offered. No reassignment followed. My role was not formally concluded. It was allowed to dissolve. This silence is not accidental. I am no longer traveling. The passports remain valid. The clearances have not been revoked. But no requests arrive. No questions are asked. No follow-up is initiated. I am not dismissed. I am contained. Brother Matteo has not contacted me. This absence is notable. He was thorough. He was consistent. If I am being observed, it is from a distance. If I am being evaluated, it is through absence rather than scrutiny. I have reviewed the previous diaries, not for accuracy, for intent. In the earliest entries, I see obedience, not blind obedience, earnest obedience. I believed that classification equated to protection, that containment equated to mercy, that silence equated to safety. I believed the system functioned because it must. Then I see hesitation, then delay, then selection, then omission, then misdirection. I did not arrive at defiance suddenly. I arrived at it gradually, through pattern recognition. The Church does not fear the unknown. It fears reinterpretation. It fears anything that cannot be anchored to hierarchy. It fears phenomena that do not require intermediaries. This does not make it evil. It makes it institutional. I have not abandoned faith. This must be stated clearly. What I have abandoned is the assumption that faith must always be managed. There are phenomena I have recorded that would cause harm if released. These should remain sealed. There are phenomena that would erode stability through dependency or escalation. These should remain contained. There are also phenomena that do neither. These are the ones that trouble the system most. They do not demand, they do not persuade, they do not convert, they clarify. Clarity reduces reliance. Reliance sustains authority. This equation is not written anywhere. It does not need to be. I have begun the final task. It was not assigned. I am organizing the diaries. Not all of them, only these. I have removed dates where possible. I have omitted locations where they could be traced. I have altered names without erasing meaning. I have preserved experience while dissolving access. These diaries are not evidence. They are warnings. To those who find them, they will appear as missionary records. Travel, observation, humanitarian concern. Only sustained reading reveals the pattern. This is intentional. I considered destroying them. This would have been safer. But safety is not always protection. Sometimes it is erasure. I have chosen preservation without instruction. Context without guidance. Truth without directive. If these diaries are discovered, they will not compel belief. They will only raise questions. This is the least dangerous outcome. I have not informed the Church of this action. I do not believe it will surprise them. Silence works both ways. There is one final matter. The chamber, the absence, the place beneath the mountain. It remains exposed. Avalanche risk persists. Time will eventually reclaim it. This is acceptable. I did not mark its location. I did not instruct anyone to guard it. I did not instruct anyone to return. It does not require protection, only neglect. Neglect is the most effective containment. I understand now that not all threats are external. Some are existential. Some are philosophical. Some emerge only when certainty is interrupted. I do not know whether the phenomena I encountered were divine, pre-divine, or entirely unrelated to faith. I no longer believe that distinction matters. What matters is consequence. What matters is impact. What matters is restraint. If authority intervenes too early, it destroys what might have been benign. If it intervenes too late, it allows harm. If it intervenes blindly, it becomes the harm. I was trained to intervene. I have learned when not to. This diary will be the last. Not because there is nothing left to observe, but because observation implies participation. And participation implies influence. I am stepping away. If Brother Matteo reads this, he will understand. He was not my adversary. He was my continuation. Someone else will now observe him. This is how the system adapts. I leave no final conclusions, no revelations, no answers. Only this: the world contains more than we are permitted to acknowledge. Some of it should remain hidden. Some of it should remain silent. Some of it should be allowed to exist without explanation. And some truths are safest when they are found, not delivered. I will place these diaries where they will not be discovered easily, but neither will they be lost. Time will decide their reader. This is not confession. This is not defiance. This is not warning. This is record. End of the final diary. I closed the box and did not reopen it, not because I was afraid, because there was nothing left to read. My granddad hadn't disappeared. He hadn't been punished. He had simply stepped aside. And somehow, that felt more unsettling than any ending I could have imagined.